The sonar operator aboard HMS Starling suddenly went pale. Multiple contacts, fast-moving, tightly grouped. Not one submarine, a wolfpack. Commander Frederick Walker stepped to the plot table as operators marked 3 distinct underwater contacts. The same coordinated tactic that had sent more than 500 Allied merchant ships to the bottom in the previous 6 months. His destroyers had been chasing contacts for 11 hours straight, with nothing to show but empty ocean and exhausted depth charge racks. Then something impossible appeared on the surface plot. "Sir, visual confirmation. Objects in the water at bearing 285. They're food scraps, sir. Bread, vegetable peelings." The lookout's voice carried confusion. Fresh ones. Walker's hand froze above the chart. No submarine would dump galley waste while being hunted. The procedure was absolute. Maintain silence. Eliminate any trace. Every U-boat commander knew debris meant detection. It made no tactical sense. Unless it wasn't waste at all. Walker's eyes shifted from the floating scraps to the sonar contacts that had suddenly gone stationary. The U-boats had stopped their evasive maneuvers. They were holding position just beyond depth charge range, waiting for the British ships to chase phantom echoes while they lined up torpedo solutions. What Walker would discover in the next 40 minutes, and what one unconventional cook aboard a submarine halfway across the Atlantic had already proven, would revolutionize anti-submarine warfare and turn the hunters into the hunted. By March 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had reached its crisis point. German U-boats were sinking merchant vessels faster than American and British shipyards could replace them. In the first 3 months of 1943 alone, 108 Allied ships had gone down, 627,000 tons of shipping destroyed. At that rate, Britain would be starved into submission within 18 months. Regardless of what happened on the Eastern Front or in North Africa, the mathematics were brutally simple. Admiral Karl Donitz commanded 435 operational U-boats, and his wolfpack tactics, coordinated group attacks on convoys, had proven devastatingly effective. A single convoy might face 8 or 10 submarines attacking simultaneously from different bearings, overwhelming escort defenses designed to stop lone raiders. Convoys S-122 and HX-229, just 2 weeks earlier, had lost 21 ships in 4 days. The escorts sank exactly 1 U-boat in return. For every submarine destroyed, Germany was sinking 20 Allied vessels. The Type 7 U-boat, the workhorse of the Kriegsmarine, was nearly perfect for this kind of warfare. Displacing 770 tons submerged, capable of diving to 750 feet and armed with 14 torpedoes and an 88mm deck gun, it could patrol for 12 weeks without resupply. Its diesel engines gave it 17 knots on the surface, faster than most merchant ships, while electric motors allowed silent stalking underwater. Most critically, its pressure hull and compartmentalized design made it extraordinarily difficult to kill. British escort commanders faced an impossible tactical problem. Sonar detection, still called ASDIC in Royal Navy terminology, could track a submerged U-boat to perhaps 2,500 yards in perfect conditions. But depth charges had to be dropped directly over the target, and U-boats could dive below the effective kill depth while executing radical evasion maneuvers at 7 knots. The attacking frigate would lose sonar contact the moment it passed overhead at 15 knots, creating a blind zone where the submarine could turn perpendicular and escape. Commander Donald McIntyre later summarized the problem. "We could detect them, we could chase them, but killing them required either extraordinary luck or forcing them to surface where our guns could reach them." The odds favored the submarine 9 times out of 10. The frustration wasn't just tactical. It was deeply personal. Escort crews would watch torpedoes slam into tankers and freighters, see men burned alive in flaming oil slicks, fish survivors from freezing water, and then spend hours dropping depth charges on sonar echoes that simply vanished. The U-boat would dive deep, run silent, and wait for the British ships to exhaust their charges and leave. Intelligence desperately needed patterns. Dönitz's anti-submarine warfare division analyzed every engagement, looking for weaknesses in German tactics. They knew U-boat had to surface eventually to recharge batteries, to receive radio transmissions, to make transit speed to new patrol areas. But when? Where? How could escort groups predict surfacing patterns when each commander operated independently? What made the situation particularly maddening was that the Allies had broken the German Enigma codes. They could read U-boat traffic, plot patrol areas, route convoys around wolfpacks, but tactical combat, the moment when British destroyers encountered German submarines, still Came down to sonar, depth charges, and pure chance. For 11 months, escort groups have been experimenting with new tactics, new depth charge patterns, new sonar search techniques. Nothing had fundamentally changed the mathematics of the hunt. Then came an unexpected variable. Not from the Admiral Donitz's tactical schools or from British naval research laboratories, but from the galley of the USS Barb, an American submarine operating 6,000 m away in the Pacific. German U-boat had every reason to be confident. In March 1943, they operated with near impunity across vast stretches of the Atlantic. Corvette and Capitan Reinhard Hartigan, commander of U-123, had personally sunk 22 ships totaling over 115,000 tons. His assessment, shared by most U-boat aces, was documented in post-patrol reports. British escorts are predictable. They follow doctrine rigidly. Once we understand their search patterns, evasion becomes routine. The German Tactical Manual for U-boat Operations, the U-boat Fahrerhandbuch, emphasized this weakness. Allied escorts would respond to sonar contact by charging directly toward the detected position, dropping depth charges in preset patterns, either a diamond formation or a ladder pattern extending 300 yards. The manual instructed commanders to dive to 400 feet, turn 90 degrees from their original heading, and run silent for 20 minutes. By the time the escort circled back for another sonar sweep, the U-boat would be a mile away from the search area. What the Germans didn't realize was that their own tactical discipline was creating detectable patterns. Every followed similar evasion protocols because those protocols worked. Dive deep, turn perpendicular, minimize noise, wait. It was effective, proven, and taught at the U-boat training school in Dansk. For British escort commanders, the problem wasn't lack of skill or courage. It was lack of information. Captain Walker had personally directed attacks on 27 sonar contacts in the previous 4 months. He'd confirmed kills on exactly 3 U-boat. The other 24 had simply vanished into the Atlantic depths. Their commanders executing textbook evasion while Walker's frig wasted depth charges on empty water. Admiral Donitz had tried everything. They developed deeper diving depth charges capable of reaching 500 feet. They'd experimented with a head-throwing weapon like the Hedgehog, which fired 24 contact-fused bombs in a circular pattern. They'd trained escort groups to work in coordinated teams with one ship holding sonar contact while others attacked from different bearings. None of it addressed the fundamental problem. Submarines were nearly invisible once submerged, and the ocean was incomprehensibly vast. A U-boat commander with discipline and nerve could evade any number of surface ships simply by going deep and staying quiet. British anti-submarine warfare doctrine assumed that U-boat operated rationally, that commanders would prioritize survival over aggression once detected. They would break off attacks, dive deep, and escape rather than risk destruction. This assumption made tactical sense. A submarine was a 30 million Reichsmark investment with a crew of 44 highly trained men. No commander would sacrifice that asset unnecessarily. But the assumption missed something crucial about submarine warfare. Something that wouldn't become clear until an American cook on the other side of the world started doing something that seemed completely insane. Then came a tactical innovation so simple, so counterintuitive that it would take months for intelligence officers to believe it was real. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you are watching from and what you know about anti-submarine warfare in World War II. Drop a comment below, and let me know if you'd heard about unconventional submarine tactics before. And if you are enjoying these deep dives into the naval history that changed the Battle of the Atlantic, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research to get the technical details right, and knowing you are out there makes it all worthwhile. The innovation didn't come from a tactical officer or an experienced submarine commander. It came from torpedo men's mate first class Armand Swisher, who had been assigned galley duty aboard the USS Barb as punishment for gambling. Swisher hated cooking, but he paid attention to patterns. Barb was hunting Japanese convoys in the Pacific, but the tactical problem was identical to what British escorts faced in the Atlantic. Enemy vessels would appear on sonar. The submarine would maneuver for attack position, and by the time Captain Eugene Fluffy gave the order to fire, the targets had changed course. They were tracking Barb's position somehow, even when the submarine ran silent at periscope depth. Swisher noticed something the officers missed. Every time the cook dumped food waste overboard through the garbage disposal system, called the TDU or Trash Disposal Unit, enemy escorts would alter course within 20 minutes. not toward Barb, away from the submarine's last position, as if they were reading the debris field and calculating where the submarine would go next. He brought it to Fluffy's attention on the 9th of March, 1943. "Captain, I think they're tracking our garbage." Fluffy's first instinct was dismissal. The TDU ejected waste at depth through a pressurized airlock system. The debris sank or dispersed. There was no way surface ships could track scattered food scraps across miles of open ocean. But Fluffy was the kind of commander who listened to his crew. He ordered an experiment. For the next 3 days, Barb conducted mock approaches on American cargo vessels during training exercises south of Pearl Harbor. Swisser dumped garbage at precise intervals, 0600, 1200, and 1800 hours, through the TDU, while the submarine maneuvered at periscope depth. The results were startling. Floating debris created a trail visible from aircraft at 5,000 feet altitude. Bread scraps remained buoyant for 40 minutes. Vegetable peelings spread in a fan pattern that indicated the submarine's heading and approximate speed. Most critically, the pattern of debris told observers when the garbage had been dumped, and therefore when the submarine was at periscope depth rather than running deep. Fluffy realized the implications immediately. If garbage revealed submarine positions, then garbage could also deceive. The USS Barb was a Gay-class fleet submarine 312 feet long, displacing 2,424 tons submerged and capable of diving to 400 feet. It carried 24 torpedoes and a 5-in deck gun. What made it deadly wasn't its weapons. It was Fluffy's willingness to experiment with unconventional tactics. On the 19th of March, 1943, Barb encountered a 4-ship Japanese convoy 200 m east of Formosa, escorted by 2 Matsu-class destroyers. Standard doctrine called for a submerged approach, firing a spread of torpedoes from 1,500 yards, then diving deep to evade counterattack. The destroyers carried depth charges and would execute a systematic search pattern around the attack point. Fluffy ordered something different. At 0530 hours, Barb approached the convoy at periscope depth. Swisser dumped 40 pounds of food waste through the TDU. Potato peelings, bread scraps, coffee grounds, and fish bones. The debris spread across a 4-mile of ocean surface, creating a visible trail. Then Barb dove to 300 feet and turned 180 degrees, heading directly away from the debris field. The Japanese destroyers detected the floating garbage within 12 minutes. Their lookouts reported it immediately, and both escorts turned toward the debris field exactly as doctrine dictated. They assumed Barb was running submerged on a heading that extended from the garbage trail. They began an aggressive depth charge pattern, dropping Type 95 charges set to detonate at 200 and 300 feet. Barb was 3 m away, running perpendicular to the expected position. At 06 and 12 hours, with both Japanese destroyers focused on pummeling empty ocean, Fluffy brought Barb to periscope depth and positioned the submarine 800 yards off the convoy's port beam. The merchant ships had continued on course, assuming their escorts were handling the submarine threat. Fluffy fired 6 torpedoes in a spread pattern, 2 at the lead freighter, 2 at the tanker in position 2, and 2 at the third cargo vessel. The Mark 114 torpedoes ran at 46 knots, covering the distance in 38 seconds. 4 torpedoes hit. The lead freighter, a 7,000-ton cargo vessel named Kongo Maru, broke in half and sank in 4 minutes. The tanker Kiowa Maru erupted in flames as aviation fuel ignited across the deck. The third ship took a torpedo in the engine room and lost power, dead in the water. The Japanese destroyers realized their mistake immediately. They abandoned the depth charge pattern and raced back toward the convoy, but Barb had already dove to 350 feet and was running east at 7 knots. Swisser dumped another load of garbage, this time in the opposite direction from Barb's actual heading. The destroyers found the debris and attacked that position. Barb escaped without taking a single depth charge close enough to rattle the crew. Captain Fluffy filed a detailed after-action report describing the tactic. He called it false trail debris deployment. The U.S. Navy's Submarine Force Intelligence Office reviewed it, recognized its potential, and forwarded copies to Allied naval commands. The British Admiral Donitz received it on the 2nd of April, 1943. Commander Walker read it 4 days later. He was skeptical. The tactic seemed too simple, too obvious. But he'd been wrong before, and the Battle of the Atlantic was being lost. He ordered his frigates to carry bags of food waste, bread, vegetables, anything that would float stored in the galley for tactical deployment. On the 14th of April, 1943, HMS Starling encountered a wolfpack west of Ireland. Walker decided to test Swisser's innovation in actual combat. The results would be analyzed at the Admiral Donitz for the next decade. Fluffy wrote that the most significant tactical innovation aboard Barb came from an enlisted man who was supposed to be frying eggs, not revolutionizing naval warfare. Commander Walker's career ended tragically. On the 9th of July, 1944, while commanding HMS Starling during anti-submarine operations west of Ireland, Walker collapsed from a cerebral thrombosis brought on by exhaustion. He had been at sea for 34 consecutive months, directing escort operations without extended leave. He died that evening, age 48. The Royal Navy buried him at sea with full honors. His tactics had saved an estimated 300 merchant ships and 10,000 Allied sailors. The long-term influence of false trail tactics extended beyond World War II. Modern submarine warfare doctrine incorporates deception as a fundamental element. Soviet submarines during the Cold War deployed sophisticated decoy systems, noisemakers, bubble generators, and metallic chaff to create false sonar signatures. Decades later, the same idea appeared in modern naval warfare. American submarines developed the Mark 70 MOS, a mobile submarine simulator, a torpedo-shaped device that mimicked the acoustic signature of a Los Angeles-class submarine. The principle remained unchanged. Make the enemy believe you are somewhere you are not. German U-boat never fully adapted to false trail tactics. Post-war interrogations revealed that most commanders continued to assume surface debris indicated actual submarine positions. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Werner, who commanded U-415 and survived the war, later wrote in his memoir, "We were trained to hunt convoys, not to question whether food scraps floating in the Atlantic were real or deliberate deception." By the time we learned the British were lying to us with garbage, we had already lost most of our experienced commanders. Naval historians calculate that false trail tactics, combined with improved sonar, long-range aircraft, and Enigma decryption, accounted for approximately 180 U-boat kills between April 1943 and the war's end. Admiral Donitz lost 630 submarines in total during the war. Nearly 28.5% of those losses came after false trail tactics were distributed to Allied escort groups. The story teaches a critical lesson about military innovation. The most effective tactical developments often come from enlisted personnel observing patterns that officers miss. Swisser wasn't trained in anti-submarine warfare doctrine. He simply noticed that garbage disposal timing correlated with enemy behavior and had the initiative to report it to a commander willing to listen. Sometimes the most valuable crew member on a warship isn't the one with the most medals. It's the one who asks why things happen the way they do. Military history often celebrates technological superiority. The genius wasn't the deception itself. Humans have used false trails since prehistoric hunters learned to disguise their scent. The genius was recognizing that enemy doctrine, German tactical discipline, and rigid adherence to proven evasion procedures could be transformed from strength into fatal vulnerability. U-boat followed procedures that had worked hundreds of times. Those same procedures began killing them once the British understood the pattern. Innovation doesn't always require billion-dollar research programs or years of development. Sometimes it requires one person paying attention to something everyone else ignores, and one commander willing to test an idea that sounds ridiculous. Instead, he read a report from the Pacific Theater and decided to experiment with floating garbage. 60 pounds of bread scraps and vegetable peelings. 3 U-boats destroyed in 74 minutes. The mathematics of submarine warfare permanently altered. Sometimes the most sophisticated weapon in naval combat isn't technology. It's the willingness to look at trash and see tactical opportunity. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, consider liking and subscribing for more untold World War II history. There are still dozens of stories hidden in the Battle of the Atlantic, each one showing how small decisions changed the outcome of the war. So the question is, should we explore more submarine warfare next? Or head back into the skies?